Hey guys, what's up? It's Jay. I'm getting started a little bit early, so maybe some of you guys out there can tell me whether the audio is working good, whether you can hear it or not. If not, we'll make some adjustments. I can't really tell, so the only thing I can tell is if I flip over and listen to it myself, which I guess I could do, um, just to see if I can hear what's going on. Sometimes it's just YouTube is a little fudgy with me. Maybe it's just me being that way with YouTube, though. I don't know. So I'm going to look real quick while we're here and see. Hello, Amy. She says hi. Amy, can you hear us out there? We want to make sure everybody can hear us before we start with the actual stuff we're going to be talking about tonight. We got a lot of stuff to talk about tonight, guys. It's going to be fun. We even had some of our famous friends weigh in on the question tonight, so that's going to be fun too. We're going to save those for later on, but and Amy says she can hear us, so we're going to go ahead and get started. We're a few minutes early, but I'd rather be early than late, right? And so Jay versus Horror is now sponsored by Body Armor because if there's a 6'5" maniac chasing you through the woods with a machete, all you really need is body armor. And that's a joke. So there we go. We started off with a joke. All right, guys. So the question tonight is, what is the best horror film of the 1990s or your favorite horror film of the entire 1990s? We're going to have a lot of fun. We have 120 comments on one of our posts, about 40 on the second post. And then we had a lot of interest from Twitterland. Like I said, we had some famous friends out there who retweeted and responded to the questions. So let's get started now. Our first comment comes from Ben Phelps, and Ben says, difficult not to put Scream up high, if not on top, of course, as it saved horror. And Ben created kind of his own little discussion with that comment. A lot of people didn't understand what he meant by saved horror. Well, I do. I kind of understand what he meant there because there wasn't a lot going on in horror. And people look back now and they say that there are no great movies in the 90s in horror. So that's kind of why we wanted to do this because I think there are a lot of great movies in that decade. They're just kind of hidden because there wasn't this onslaught of great horror films like there was in the 80s. So you kind of have to it's kind of like hunting for Easter eggs, right? You have to get out there and look and then once your basket's full you're like, "Wow, there really was a bunch." But yeah, Ben said that it saved Scream saved horror and several people asked why he thought that. And he said that horror was in a dark place for a while. It was on the outs, and Scream brought it back. I don't know. I think there's some pretty heavy, great horror movies in the front end of the 90s, right? Especially around 1990. We have a lot that we'll talk about later, so I'm not going to mention them now. But yeah, right around 90, 91, 92, there was some pretty good horror films there. But yeah, so Ben said that. And Emily Dunlap said she's not a big fan of the franchise, but she does agree that it reinvigorated slashers. And she loves the first one. Charles Morgan said, or Ben says to Charles Morgan, it couldn't be ignored back then. It was fresh and different. And Rick Gazan says I'm not young, but I never felt like Scream was a good slasher. For me, it was just a teenage horror with no likable characters. It got too much credit, I think. I don't know, Rick. That's a tough one. I have to kind of agree with Ben here. I don't know if Scream saved horror. I don't know if I can go that far. But I will say this, it did give it kind of an injection that it needed at the time because there weren't any franchises for that decade of kids. There was Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street, Halloween, Texas Chainsaw, all that came in the 70s, 80s. And then, by the 90s, those were starting to, peter out, to be honest with you. You had the end of the Friday the 13th and Nightmare on Elm Street franchises and or basically the end of the first front, of those films. But so there was nothing for the 90s kids. There was nothing for them to claim and say, this is ours. This is exclusively ours. Uh, and I think Scream did that for a lot of kids out there. And it wasn't just Scream. I talked about this with Wes Jones the other day from Real Talk, a movie podcast. Check them out, guys, if you like a real good movie podcast. And we talked about how there was a lot of teenage stuff that was presented in the 90s. Not just Scream, but there was also like Scary Movie, and which was, you know, a parody of Scream and other scary other horror films. And there was also, you know, just a lot of great teen movies in that era. And you could say that a lot of those films were reactionary to Scream. So thankfully, if it wasn't for Scream, we might not have I Know What You Did Last Summer. We might not have The Faculty, Disturbing Behavior. What's some of the other ones, guys? Urban Legend, and on into the 2000s with films like Valentine. I don't know if we'd have those if it wasn't for Scream, right? Because once a film comes out, it's a hit. You get all these reactionary films that other people love. And so we're looking at both comment. I'm looking at both sides of the screen. I've got comments everywhere, and we're getting a lot of. Joni DJ says hi Jay, hi. Puric Kina says hi Jay, hello. Serge Alvarez says 90s was great for horror. Candyman alone rules. I think that's a pretty good film. That's a pretty good. Like we were talking about, I think the front end of the 90s is pretty heavily loaded. The back end of the 90s is pretty heavily loaded. And it's just kind of in the middle where people think it's weak. Because if you look at, yeah, you know, Candyman is 92. You also have Dr. Giggles around 92. You have Silence of the Lambs around 91. You have Misery, The Exorcist Part 3 during the 90s or 1990, I believe. So we're moving on. Elena Benz also comments on that Scream post, and she said, or comment, and she says it was a breath of fresh air. It revived Chucky and Michael, and all that self-aware meta trend stuff became standard in horror. I agree with that. Yeah, there was a lot of self-awareness about horror after that. Trent Owens says Cube, and Trent Owens is the only one who said Cube. So, yeah, we're going to talk about that for a minute. Now, Cube is a good movie. I don't know that it's something I would say is the best. There were 3 Cube movies, by the way. And I think they're working on a new one right now. It's actually being remade into an Asian horror film. So, yeah, Cube is a very interesting pick. And Kevin Mays follows that up with Candyman, which, yeah, Candyman we just talked about. And he said he also has to mention the Blair Witch Project because although it wasn't the first found footage movie, it practically created or at least jump-started the horror genre. Now, I'm going to say this. Blair Witch Project's not the first found footage horror film, but it's the first one that I remember people calling it found footage, right? Before that, they called it other stuff. They called it like cinema verite or mockumentary and things like that. And there are other films before that. Actually, I think The Last Broadcast came out a year before Scream, or excuse me, Blair Witch Project. The Last Broadcast came out the year before that. It was a very low budget found footage movie. And you can go back to Cannibal Holocaust and things like that. And there's even other films that have that, you know, like it's being filmed while it's happening look, but they didn't know what to call it back then. So it wasn't called found footage. And Joni DJ says Scream is a horror movie about horror movies. It's made for horror fans. It was the movie that said, aren't you tired of cliches and dumb characters? Me too. Follow me. It was a turning point. I kind of agree. I think that Wes never really made a slasher until Scream. Now, people say Nightmare on Elm Street's a slasher, not the first one. I don't think it's intended to be a slasher. I think it's a supernatural horror film that just happens to involve teenagers. Now, yeah, if you want to call it a slasher, I'm not going to argue with you because it's fine with me that it falls into that category or whatever. But I think Scream was Wes saying, okay, you guys want me to make a slasher? I'm going to make a slasher, but it's going to be totally different than what you think, right? So, yeah, and we talked about this the other night too. You can see Wes playing with that already. When 2 years before Scream, New Nightmare comes out, which is another film that's going to be mentioned a lot tonight. And New Nightmare is where you can see Wes playing with those ideas. The film inside the film. Why are we at this point in horror? Why does everything have to be the same? Why can't it be different? And so, yeah, that's a very good point. Let's move on. And Arthur Surface says, The People Under the Stairs, Bram Stoker's Dracula, The Silence of the Lambs, but my favorite would be In the Mouth of Madness. And that's a great pick. I love that movie. We talked about that recently, too. Very self-referential, of course, again, and it's hard for me to think within the Mouth of Madness that John Carpenter isn't taking a little poke at Stephen King there. Even though the author in that is named Sutter Kane, it sounds very much like Stephen King, right? Do you read Sutter Kane? Remember that guy with the axe? But yeah, Seems like he was taking a little poke at Stephen King, who had took a little poke at a lot of directors in the horror genre. And we've got some other comments over here. Amy Ramirez says Night of the Demons 2. She says Dusk Till Dawn 1 and 2 are very good, and Brain Scan. Who Done It 32 says Jacob's Ladder, not a gore fest, but enjoy it. Yes, that's like I was talking about, how that front end of the 90s is heavily loaded. I mean, there's some of the greatest horror films of all time in that front end of that uh, portion of the 90s. Right around 1990, The Exorcist 3, Jacob's Ladder, just on and on, Misery. So Lip Magbitang, and I don't think that's a joke name. That's really that person's name. Like, somebody asked me that before if that was a joke. It's not a joke. That's their name. The Silence of the Lambs, in terms of critical and box office success, cultural impact, lasting legacy, opening doors for horror as respectable Main Street entertainment, recognition of quality through parody, etc. Yes. And what do they say? They say the greatest form of admiration is impersonation, or something like that. I think you see when things become culturally significant that they get parodied a lot. Scream's been parodied a lot. The Silence of the Lambs may be one of the most parodied things of all time. Children of the Corn, things like that. They become ingrained in culture. They're not just horror movies anymore. They belong to the entire culture at that point when they're that recognizable. And yes, Silence just had their 30th anniversary. Silence of the Lambs turned 30 on February 14th, by the way, Valentine's Day. It was released 1991 Valentine's Day. And what a great date movie. I still say it's a great date movie. I think you'd be hard-pressed to find a better pair than Clarice and Hannibal, right? Even though they weren't lovers, they definitely had a connection. Maybe not even the connection that Will and Hannibal had, which is maybe something that should be discussed. But they had a great connection, and that film is now 30 years old. It's one of the best films ever made, in my opinion. I could go on and on about it. But yeah, I think Lip is right here as far as how Silence opened a lot of doors. Before this, horror movies weren't taken very seriously, and people can argue about whether it's a horror movie or not. I don't argue genre with people. I think if you think it's a horror movie, I don't care if it's Beauty and the Beast. If you think it's a horror movie, that's fine. And so I always connected with Silence as a horror movie. And think of all the thrillers that came after Silence. I mean, I don't know if we would have Seven and things like that came after Silence. But yeah, great there. And of course, they won the 4 biggest Oscars you can win: Best Director, Best Actor, Best Actress, Best Picture, and even won, I think, Best Adapted Screenplay, I believe. So yeah, great answer there. John Sandoval says Scream, in his opinion. Wayne Walker Jr. says Brain Scan, and Brain Scan is one we've talked about a little bit in the past. I like Brain Scan a lot. I always wondered why there wasn't a sequel to Brain Scan. But it's kind of like the end of the Eddie Furlong era, and Emily says that too here. And let's see what we have over here on the right side. I'm getting comments on both sides, guys. Amy says, well, wait, let's go back up here. Serge Alvarez says Ravenous, and that's a great pick. That's the one that I threw out earlier, was Ravenous. I think it's a very interesting cannibal horror film with a great cast. DJ says UFO Abduction, released in 1989, was also a big and scary found footage 10 years before Blair Witch. But for some reason, people don't actually talk about it. Yeah, there's a lot of other films like that, like Ghost Watch. If you guys don't remember, there's a film called Ghost Watch from the UK that they actually aired, I believe, on Halloween night. And it became kind of a War of the Worlds situation where people were watching it and they thought they were watching an actual news broadcast. And when the scary stuff started to happen in that movie, people started calling into the news station and say, "Hey, your people are getting killed here by these ghosts and stuff." And it was a real big deal in the UK. So yeah, there's lots of found footage stuff before Blair Witch. They just didn't call it found footage. And podcast Naharian says Scream. Imitation is the greatest form of flattery, I think is the way the saying goes, says Whodunit. Yes, thank you, Whodunit. That's what it was in my mind, but it wasn't on the tip of my tongue. And Amy Ramirez says Tales from the Crypt, the series. That's great. I mean, it's not a movie, but yes, it's very important to horror. I think it opened up a large door for horror because HBO was able to show us things that we couldn't see on Fox or NBC or CBS. And for a lot of kids in that era, from I think Tales started in '89 and ran till I think '96 or '97, it's a big had a big cultural impact on us. And I had a friend the other day who said, he didn't understand it because he's from Canada and that they didn't have, or they didn't have HBO where he lived, and they didn't have anything like that. They didn't show Tales from the Crypt in syndication, and so he didn't understand it. And I said, well, that's just one of those things. It's very important to a lot of kids who grew up and saw it, and because it really was able to show us the gore, and it made that link back to the old comic books from the 50s and stuff, so the parents were willing to watch it too. And uh, let's see here. Have some more comments. Okay, Amy says, yeah, okay. Who Done It says Misery is another early 90s one. Yes. 1990 Texas Chainsaw 3. DJ says Tremors, Nightbreed, Tales from the Dark Side, Gremlins 2, Arachnophobia, Exorcist 3. I think it's just naming off everything from 1990, right? That's what you're doing here. The Living Dead, Night of the Living Dead remake, Child's Play 2, The Reflected Skin. That's a good film that nobody ever talks about with Viggo Mortensen. The Reflected Skin, or Reflecting Skin, I think it's called. Predator 2 and Misery, all from 1990. So that's a great year. I can't wait to get to that one. We're doing them year by year on the channel also, and I'm up to 1985 is what I'll be working on tomorrow. And yeah, I can't wait to get to 1990 because there's just a lot of great films from 1990. We are moving on, guys. I'm trying to keep it moving. We have a lot of comments to get to cover today. Lucas Posey says Candyman. Candyman, yeah, great horror film from the 90s, early 90s. And it's so interesting the way they changed Candyman, right? Because I don't know if everyone knows this or not, but what is the name of the story that Candyman is based on? The Forever or something like that? I can't remember. But in that story, Candyman is white. He's not black. And when they adapted this for a movie, I think it's just genius the way they tied all that in together, and how Candyman was basically a slave who had been tortured for, having a love affair that was seen to be taboo or something at that time. Man, it just really worked with the story, though, and you can't really imagine it any other way after that, right? Uh, George Christensen says my favorite is Friday the 13th. There's not a whole lot of Friday the 13th in the 90s. I think basically Jason Goes to Hell. I don't really think there's another one in the 90s because I think Jason X comes much later on, like 2001 or something, like 2002, something like that. Serge says, Alexander says, cheers, Alexander. Serge says, Arachnophobia is a very fun and underrated horror movie. It is very fun. People forget about how funny that movie is. And if spiders creep you out, yeah, it's definitely right there. It's one of those movies that will get to you, right? Jeff Daniels is very good in it. I think a lot of people forget that John Goodman was spectacular in that movie. Willis Wheeler says, "Hey Jay, guys, check Willis out on here on YouTube. He's got some great stuff on his channel." He says, "Hey Jay, what's up, Willis?" Who Done It 32 says, "Phantasm movies also with the weird balls odd movie." Yeah, weird balls always make for odd movies, right? Excuse me. That one choked me up a little bit, but the balls choked me up. Oh well. Yeah, but the Phantasm movies, I don't think they got into the 90s until it was part 3 and 4, right? We're in the 90s. And Flamethrower Fluff Salisbury. I love the names on YouTube, guys. You blow me away with these names. My favorite 90s horror film is From Dusk Till Dawn. I was expecting it to be crap, but ended up loving it. I got a great story about Dusk Till Dawn. I actually tricked my mom into taking me to see that. My mom is a nurse. At the time, she was a lab tech. She drew blood. Now she's a nurse practitioner. She just kept going to school and getting more and more education. But at this time, like ER was a big deal, right? On TV. Everybody watched ER. And my mom was in love with George Clooney. Now, I kind of knew what Dusk Till Dawn was about. Hadn't seen the movie yet, but I'd seen the trailer. I'd read a little bit about it here and there. And I knew it was a weird vampire movie that was written by Quentin Tarantino. So I tricked her into taking me to see it because she is a vampire movie fan, even though her vampire movies are more like, Christopher Lee and stuff like that in the 70s. But it had George Clooney in it. So I tricked her to take me to see it, and I've never been more awkward. I've never had a more awkward movie experience in my life, right? Because she sat there and watched it with me, and she didn't say a word because that was the only way I could get in to see it. Right then, it was rated R, and our theater was real strict about R-rated movies. Uh, so I had to get her to take me to see it so I could see it, and yeah, that was awkward. The whole Salma Hayek dancing scene, and some of the stuff with Cheech, and some of the stuff with Julianne was a little odd, or Juliette Lewis, I mean, was a little bit odd. Yeah. But when it was over, I just got in a car and she didn't say anything to me. And we were about halfway home. She's like, that was a really good movie. And I'm like, yeah, it was a really good movie. Thanks, Mom, for not, uh, you know, grounding me, for tricking you into taking me to an R-rated movie that I didn't think you wanted to see. But anyway, uh, Amy says Bride of Reanimator. It's a decent movie. Serge says, can't forget about the Ninth Gate. God, I wish I could forget about the Ninth Gate, man. Honestly, when I went to see that one at the theater, I didn't make it all the way through it. I was on a date and we wanted to go do something else. So, yeah, we left before the end of the Ninth Gate. And I saw it later on and I was like, the end kind of brings it together. I wish I'd have maybe stuck around for some more of it then. We're drinking Tropical Punch Body Armor tonight. Normally or back in the old days, I'd be taking shots of Fireball and drinking some Bud Light Platinum, but the doc knocked me off all that stuff. Said, Jay, you got to stop drinking. Not that I was an alcoholic or anything. I just have a bad liver, so it's you have to be careful with the drinking, and even taking like aspirin and Tylenol and stuff. I have to be careful with that stuff now. But yeah, I don't miss it, to be honest with you. I really enjoy my body armor. So also we've got here Julia McAndrew says Flatliners. Who Done It says Leprechaun. Amy says Fallen. Serge says Idle Hands. Jillian says It. Sleepy Hollow. Amy says John Carpenter's Vampires. George Charleston says 1991. Sometimes they come back. That's interesting, George, because that's the first time I've seen that. And I've looked through about 300 comments today on different posts, and that's the first time I've seen that. Willis says Freddy's dead only because I got my mom to take me. I feel that, man. Amy said sometimes they come back too. Sometimes they come back for more. I think there's 3 or 4 of those movies. Jillian says Tremors for horror comedy. We're going to get to that too later on. So our next comment comes from Miles Maley. Guys, check out Miles Maley and James McFetters and all their friends, Ryan DeVoe, over at Evil Jelly, the Evil Jelly podcast. These guys are fun, man. They do some great stuff, and they really know about horror. So I highly recommend everybody check out the Evil Jelly podcast. I'm going to do that. These people are all my friends, so I'm going to throw promos out there as we go. But he says for the 90s, I have always had it as a dead nuts tie. Never heard that before, dead nuts tie, between Misery and Silence of the Lambs. And I don't think you could go wrong with either one of those. But he said the one that he could put in and watch the most is Army of Darkness. And I think that's pretty interesting because Army of Darkness is kind of like a light horror movie, right? It's fun. It's not even completely horror. There's a lot of fantasy elements in it and stuff. I'm not saying it's not horror because it is, but there's a lot of fantasy elements and stuff. And Bruce Campbell just makes the day with that one. Joe Cordiero says Stir of Echoes. That's a good choice and not one I saw a lot today, Joe. And for anyone who likes Stir of Echoes, I'm going to throw one out here to you. If you like Stir of Echoes, go watch The Psychic from Lucio Fulci, 1977. One of his more underrated films. It's not one that people always talk about, the New York Ripper. They talk about Zombie 2. They talk about The Beyond. Beyond is personally my favorite of his. But Psychic, or The Psychic, would probably be my number 2 Fulci film. And you can see where tons of films like Stir of Echoes took a lot from The Psychic, and it's not like they gave it any credit, but I don't know how they would have done that anyway. But yeah, a lot of the themes and plot points in Stir of Echoes and things like that, where there's even The Changeling, which came out a few years after The Psychic, is very similar to The Psychic. Let's see over here. We're back over here on the right side now. Serge says, I love Fred Ward and Tremors. Yeah, Fred Ward. Also Kevin Bacon, Michael Gross, Reba McEntire. It's just a great movie, right? And what I love about Tremors is when I was a kid, they used to show it, I was probably like 14 or 15 when they started showing it on TBS, and they would show it on TBS, and they would do the most horrible edits. You guys probably remember Die Hard, them editing Die Hard 2, and it being "F you, Mr. Valken," instead of "Yippee ki motherfucker." It was "F you, Mr. Valken," and they did the same thing with Tremors. The scene in the basement where Bert is down there, just rapid firing at this graboid that comes through the wall, and they finally kill it. Him and Reba McEntire finally kill it after they get the elephant gun out, right? And he says, "You broke into the wrong goddamn rec room, didn't you?" Well, on the TBS edit, it says, "You broke into the wrong Goldorn rec room, didn't you?" It just doesn't even sound like their voice. It's so hilarious. And I know that's cheesy, but I love it. And Joni DJ says, as far as remakes go, 1999 remake of House on Haunted Hill was one of the best. Serge says, Frighteners is a decent horror comedy. Yes, Frighteners is a good one, and it's not one that was mentioned a lot today, so that was a pretty good comment. Aiden Vavara says, hello, everybody. Hello, Aiden. And they say, I always liked Toby Hooper's The Mangler. I don't know if that movie's underrated or if it's just not for some people, right? I like it. I like, Ted Levine's in that too, right? I believe it's Ted Levine, Buffalo Bill. And he just the way he talks through that in that movie, I like it. I don't know. And Robert Englund's in it as well. I think it's based on a Stephen King short story or something. I can't remember. Oh man, here we go. Here we go. I was going to talk about this movie if nobody else mentioned it, and I will honestly say that nobody mentioned it until right now. And it's Whodunit 32 says body parts. I think that's where a guy gets a hand transplant and the guy was a serial killer. Yes. And I'm going to tell you something. This movie fucked with me hard as a kid because I am a transplant survivor. I got a liver transplant when I was 2 years old. I have lived with someone else's liver for 39 years. And yeah, that movie fucked with me quite a bit because I started to wonder. I mean, it's hard when you have that going on not to wonder about, like, is it possible for memory to transfer through flesh? And, you know, it's a whole mind thing, especially when you actually have a transplant. It will actually fuck with your head. But it's a great film. Nobody really talks about it. Jeff Fahey is one of those forgotten stars of the 90s, right? He was in The Lawnmower Man. He was in Body Parts. He was in Sketch Artist. He was in a lot of good stuff even before that. He played the bad guy in that great Western Silverado with Kevin Costner and Kevin Kline and Scott Glenn and just Jeff Goldblum and everybody else that's in that cast. Brian Dennehy. And George Charleston says the other one I can think of is The Ninth Gate, yeah. And Aiden Vivara says, any fans of Dario Argento's Trauma? I love Dario Argento's Trauma. What a great film. You know, it's got Asia Argento in it. She's very young in that. Also, a little cameo from Brad Dourif there. And I believe Tom Savini did the effects on that movie, and it was shot in Canada. And if that's not crazy enough, very few people in the movie speak English. Most people in the movie, they speak a lot of Italian in that movie. And so I like it a lot, though. And I think it's got one of the best twist endings of any of the Dario Argento films. And I'm going to get back to the left side here because we're getting behind. And we're going to view some more comments. Now, we had Darcy from Joe Bob Briggs. Everybody knows who Darcy is, Diana Prince. She's commented on Twitter and retweeted with both of her accounts, Free Darcy and her regular account. So we're going to talk about that in a little bit. Also had Joe Russo from Nightmare Cinema that came out a couple years ago. He works with Mick Garris on his podcast, so he had some comments. We're going to talk about those in a little bit. Emily Dunlap says, Jacob's Ladder, then Scream, I suppose. It did give new life to horror, especially the slasher subgenre. Now, if you guys don't know who Emily is, Emily and Alex Pearson host a show called Gag Me with a Knife. They just had a new episode drop today here on YouTube. Check it out. They talk about the last slumber party. These guys always talk about these really crazy slashers from the 80s. And today they talked about the last slumber party. It's always a lot of fun to listen to. Her and Alex are great friends. She says she also loves Night of the Demons too, but that's kind of more of a nostalgic pick than anything. Nathan Bartlebaugh from The Phantom Menace. Wait, I said that wrong. No, I did that on purpose. Nathan hosts a podcast called The Phantom Galaxy, and it's a great podcast. They talk about all different kinds of stuff, everything from animation to horror movies to sci-fi to fantasy. Just a great, nice podcast where you can hear lots of different genres. or lots of conversation about different genres. And Nathan says that Emily beat him to it with Jacob's Ladder, but let me throw out a different one for conversation's sake, Audition. And that's a close one. Yeah, the Audition 99. Uh, what a great movie. Basically, the Asian version of Fatal Attraction turned up a little bit. I always use that line from Spinal Tap, turn it up to 11. You know what I mean? And so that's what I think of Audition. I love that movie. It's a great Takashi Miike film. If you haven't seen Audition, I highly recommend it, guys. There's still a few people out there who haven't, and I know a lot of people say it's slow. It is slow. Like the first hour of it is just build up, but once that thing takes that big left turn, it involves a big canvas bag. I'll say that. Once it takes that big left turn, there's no going back. It's a great psychological horror film, also very gory and disturbing. Quentin Quarantino says, that's funny, Quentin Quarantino. Candyman. We all love the Candyman. Matt Rawlings from Father and Son Watch Horror Movies, another great podcast for you guys to check out. He says, Matt's actually a fun dude because he's a pastor too. So you get this really cool sensibility from this guy, because you think, anyone who's super religious wouldn't like horror films, but Matt loves horror films and he's a pastor and he's always got great things to say and great ideas. He says Silence of the Lambs is in his top 10 of all time, and knowing you, Jay, I think you would approve. Absolutely. Silence is probably my favorite film of all time. It's right there, man. It's the Silence of the Lambs, The Shining, and The Exorcist are pretty close in my opinion. It just depends on what day I'm talking to you. You know what I mean? If it's Thursday morning, it might be The Shining. If it's raining outside, it might be, or if it's snowing outside, it might be Misery or The Shining. But yeah, it just depends. I bounce back and forth. So if you guys hear me say that a lot, you probably will if you watch the channel. That's my favorite movie, or that's one of my favorite movies, or my top 10 horror movies is really probably about a top 100. And every time I'll hear one that I really love, I'll be like, oh yeah, that's probably in my top 10. So my wife swears up and down that Maximum Overdrive is my favorite movie. She says it's my favorite movie because it's the one I've watched the most. That and the Stan miniseries are the ones I watch the most, but that doesn't make it my favorite. It's just my go-to, right? Something I could put on and I don't have to think about because I've already seen it so many times. When I watch The Shining and Silence, I like to sit there and reevaluate. I like to evaluate all the things I've already evaluated, right? And so Kelly Edwards, who is one of our patrons on Patreon, Kelly supports the channel. She says, guys, Misery, Sixth Sense, Mute Witness, and Scream, all great picks. Guys, we have a contest going on right now. If you want to be a part of it, check us out on Patreon, Jay vs. Horror on Patreon. For as little as $2 a month, if you donate $2 a month to the channel to help keep us going, we will put you in a drawing. The first thing we're giving away, April 1st, we're giving away the entire Friday the 13th, the series. I'm talking about the TV show, seasons 1, 2, and 3. There's 3 seasons to it. We're giving away all 3 seasons on DVD to one person. We're going to draw one name. Right now, we only have 8 people in the drawing, so there's a real good chance you could win. And then the first of the month after that, every month, we're going to draw for 2 free Blu-rays, right? So, yeah, if you're a contributor, check us out. If you're not a contributor, go to check us out, Jay vs. Horror on Patreon. If you can donate a couple bucks a month, it's much appreciated. It helps keep the channel going, helps us pay subscription fees for editing, and it helps us pay for this new beautiful computer we just bought that costs $2,000. And yeah, just kind of offset some of the costs we have for buying movies and things like that too. And we're going to give back. We're going to do that every month. The first of every month, we're going to have a drawing. If you're one of our patrons, you're going to be in the drawing. So we're moving on here. Brandy Johnson, another one of our patrons, just right behind her, says, Event Horizon scared me more than any movie I saw before or since. And that's pretty interesting. I know they lost a lot of footage from Event Horizon, but I wish they hadn't, man. That's little segment that they show you in the movie from the ship that came, the crew of the ship that came back through the wormhole or whatever it was called. Wow. That little segment is like as powerful as the entire Hellraiser movie, right? And there was a whole bunch more of that stuff they filmed, but it got lost or destroyed or whatever. And Dave Becker, Dr. Shock, Dave Becker, the man himself, the man, the myth, the legend, often imitated, never duplicated. Dr. Shock, Dave Becker says, I'm a fan of Candyman, and also I love The Exorcist Part Three. And who doesn't, man? The Exorcist Part Three is one of the greatest horror sequels of all time. A super awesome psychological horror film, and it's really the film that saved. I mean, a lot of people don't think of Exorcist as a franchise because it's just got that really great first strong movie, and then part two's not that great. Part three is awesome though, and it's worth putting The Exorcist into a list of top franchises just from that. I like the beginning. I like Exorcist Dominion. I like those movies too. The two that are at the back that were made together. But they're, one of them to me, Exorcist the beginning is they tried to gear that more like The Ring. They wanted more effects. They wanted more scares, more jump scares. And then Dominion was more subtle and it was kind of like a psychological horror film. I like both of them. I don't know if they're super strong, but definitely Exorcist 3 Legion is super strong. So we are going back here. Who Done It 32 says they did a similar story with John Carpenter's Body Bags also. Yeah, that's a fun whole thing. I like the Stacy Keach segment in John Carpenter's Body Bags for his hair. There's like little aliens. He gets a hair transplant. And it's little aliens. Uh, he also said with the baseball gets a eye transplant and was a serial killer. That's interesting too because I think like you guys seen VHS 2. I know you probably have. There's a segment in there that for some reason stars Adam Wingard instead of him directing it, and he has a eye implant that he can now see ghosts that attack him and stuff. So I always wondered how much of that they took from that segment in Body Bags. Uh, George says, how about The Cube? We talked about that one a little bit earlier. 3 great films in the Cube series, and also they are remaking that for the Asian audience now, which is awesome because they don't usually do that, right? They usually remake foreign horror films for us, but they rarely remake our films for them or for foreign countries. They've done it with Rambo. If you guys didn't know, there's like an Indonesian version of It out there too. Check that out if you ever get a chance. It's fun. The clown in it looks more like a hobo. He looks like the littlest hobo. But okay, here we go. Trying to catch up on your guys' comments over here on the right. I got behind there for a minute. Serge says Dance with the Devil with Javier Bardem and Rosie Perez is worth mentioning. Uh, Aiden says she's talking to Amy about Dario. And she says, alongside George Romero, which is cool because they both work together a lot. And Horror Digest says, hello, Horror Digest. Amy Ramirez is talking to Aiden. Willis says Dinner was in the 90s, wasn't it? I believe Dinner was in the 90s, late 90s, I think 97. Great film there. I always make the joke that when it happens to me, it's not going to be like that. The gypsy lady is going to come up and run her finger down my forehead and say, Fata. And then that's what's going to happen to me. I'm going to get fatter. Ever since I quit drinking and cut back on the cigarettes and all that stuff, I have gained a lot of weight. So summer's on the way. I'm ready to bust some of it off again and get back in good shape, hopefully. Who Done It 32 said, I remember Thinner. It's where he wastes away, right? Yeah, okay. I see that. Yeah. Yeah, it's like he has a disease or something. He wastes away very quickly. And the end, there's a little nasty twist to that movie at the end, right? Wear the Illini hat tonight, guys. The reason why March Madness is about to start. Uh, Illinois, I think, is going to make it. Mizzou is going to make it. And I think St. Louis is going to make it. Hopefully, I got my fingers crossed for St. Louis. They're on the bubble. But yeah, that's my home area. So yeah, representing the Fighting Illini, University of Illinois. And George says, if you like The Shining, you should watch Doctor Sleep. Yes, I read Doctor Sleep several times and watched the movie a couple times. I like both the book and the film. Gladwin Scott music obsolete, says Stephen King's It had a profound effect on my 11-year-old head. That's funny, man. I was 11 years old when that came out too, and I absolutely love that movie, and I absolutely love the remake too. I'm not gonna short either one of them. I think they're both good in their own era, and I think they both were great for kids in their own era. I'm trying to see if there's anything else here. How about Texas Chainsaw? I mean, we're talking about favorite and the best, so how about Texas Chainsaw Next Generation with Renee Zellweger and Matthew McConaughey? At least she put a smiley face on that. She was She knew that that's not exactly what we were going for. But yeah, I mean, if you love it, you love it, right? Who cares what anybody else thinks? And oh, Serge says Needful Things. Yeah, that's a great one, man. I love Max von Sydow in that. One of my favorite Stephen King characters is Alan Pangborn, and Ed Harris does a great job playing Alan Pangborn in that. He just seems to pop up in a lot of stories, right? And Amy says Ghost in the Machine. Ghost in the Machine is a good movie that a lot of people did not see. There's some great. It's a pretty good movie for that era. I liked it a lot. Yeah, it's basically like this serial killer dies and he gets into electronics somehow, and he has this woman's what is it like an address book, right? He's got her address book and he starts picking off her friends and stuff electronically, uh, electrocuting people, doing different stuff to them. It's a fun movie. And Jillian says Brain Dead. So we're moving on back over here to the right side. Might be the wrong side, but it looks like actually this is the left side for me. It would be the right side for you guys. But anyway, so the next one is I said I'll throw in Dust Till Dawn. We talked about that already. Several people mentioned it. Marty Fleming says Alien 3, The Exorcist 3, Nightbreed, and Chronos. So some great movies there to talk about. I love Alien 3. I know a lot of people don't. It's so heartbreaking at the beginning of it when you find out that Newt is dead. And is it Hicks? I think his name is Hicks that died. I was because of the joke, because of the freaking joke in the movie Aliens, I get Hicks and the other guy confused all the time now because they made the joke that they were confused. Uh, Nightbreed, yeah, great film. I love Nightbreed. I think it could have been a little better considering the source material, and I really wish what had happened with that movie is I really wish David Cronenberg had directed it and been in it. He plays Dr. Decker in that, or Decker, or whatever it is, and that. But I really wish he had directed it, man, because I think it would have been a runaway hit if he had directed it as well as been in it. And he also mentions Chronos, which is a great vampire movie. If you guys like unconventional vampire movies, go watch Chronos, one of Guillermo del Toro's first really great films. Also has Ron Perlman in it. We just recently watched that a while back because Regina had never seen it. I said, don't forget, or we can't forget Man Bites Dog. Man Bites Dog, a great Belgium serial killer flick from the early 90s. Very much like a found footage mockumentary type film about a camera crew that follows around a serial killer who does insanely horrible things to people. I wouldn't even say he's just a serial killer. He's kind of like a sociopath, just a person who likes to commit horrible crimes and laugh while he's doing it. So, Tony Kanopka, another one of our patrons, and Emily's one of our patrons too. I decided to plug her show instead of talking about her being a patron while ago, but she's one of our patrons. We give a lot of love to our patrons, guys. Anybody who donates $2 or more a month to the channel, we have a show once a month for them where it's just about them, whatever they want us to talk about, we talk about. They're in the drawing for the free DVDs or free Blu-rays every month. They're somebody that if they have anything they want supported or promoted, we're going to talk about that at length. So yeah, and Tony's one of those, and Tony's been with us since the beginning, guys. He says Silence of the Lambs for me. If we're talking about most enjoyable, rewatchable, then I'd have to go with From Dusk Till Dawn and The Day of the Beast. And I think Tony's the only one who mentioned The Day of the Beast, which is also a pretty good film from that era. And we'll flip back over here to the right just a minute. And Gladwin Scott says he wasn't. I don't know if you're a he or she. That's the confusing thing about YouTube names. I don't know if it's a guy or a girl or a group of people I'm talking to. But Gladwin says wasn't keen on the clown in the remake. I get that. A lot of people weren't. Aiden says, I love Dario Argento's The Stenhall Syndrome. It's a gritty film from the master. Yes, we have that on the channel here, actually. Right here on Jay versus Horror, you can go watch The Stenhall Syndrome. We also have Trauma and The Card Player from Dario Argento that you can watch for free right here on our channel. The Stenhall Syndrome is one of my favorite movies from Dario Argento, and I love the concept of it, that people can become so engrossed in art that they can become like hypnotically transported, away from reality. And there's Asia Argento is in, I think it's Asia Argento, playing a detective, and she's chasing a serial killer in Rome, and she's at this museum and becomes taken by the Stenhall syndrome. and that's how this guy is able to get to her over and over. And I think Thomas Kretschmann plays the killer in that movie, and he is one of the most insane son of a bitches I've ever seen in a horror film. I'll say that. Great film. Who done it says Creepshow 2, although it was 3 years before 1990. Yeah, that was that's before. Love the Wooden Indian, Old Chief Woodenhead, right? Wasn't that the name of it? Jamie Miller says Sleepaway Camp is my favorite. There's some of the Sleepaway Camp sequels in the 90s. Amy Ramirez says Sleepwalkers. What a weird movie, right? Just such a weird movie. The guy, the mom, the cats, the cat people. It was all so very weird. George says he loved the Langoliers, and that's not something that you're going to hear from a lot of people. But George, guess what? We do have the Langoliers free right here on the J versus Horror channel. Anytime you want to check it out, you want to watch the whole miniseries. And Glavin says, I'm a he, by the way. Thank you for that. I mean, pronouns don't matter to me. It's just, I hate to say the wrong one. That's the only thing is, lots of times I'll say, hey, buddy, or guy, or whatever. So, I don't know, especially Facebook, people tend to use their names a little more or closer to their names. YouTube, it might be, Cock Gobbler 81, and you don't know, is that a guy or a girl or whatever? You don't know. Like, you'll get some weird horrorstranglers.com is a name or something. You'll get some weird names. And so let's move on. We're moving back to the other side now. Will Walker says Scream, Urban Legends, 7. We hadn't talked about 7 yet. Pumpkinhead. Pumpkinhead's a great film. I know that Pumpkinhead 2 came out in the 90s, but I think Pumpkinhead, the original, is like 88 or something. Urban Legend is one of those reactionary films that, is made because I think we can look at Scream and say if we don't have Scream, we wouldn't have I Know What You Did Last Summer or Urban Legend, even though they're not the same. People say they're the same. They're not the same, but they are a product of something that was successful being, put back out into the world. So 7, very interesting film for me. I talked about Dusk Till Dawn. I had that experience with going to see that with my mom. My dad took me to see 7, and I think I was like 15 when 7 came out. And he took me to the theater, and I just remember the guy at the ticket booth being like, dude, are you sure you want to take your kid to see this? I've seen it twice. And my dad said, shut the hell up and give me the damn ticket. It's my kid. That's the way my dad was. So, yeah, we went and saw it together. And I got to say, I love him. He was my dad was a pretty cool dude, and he loved movies. So he really gave me a lot. Everybody in my life contributed to my education in horror. I lost my dad. It's been 7 years ago since he's been gone now. It's getting close to 7 years. It'll be 7 years in June. He passed away. And I still think about him all the time. I still think about him every time I see a movie on TV that, like recently, I think the one that I saw that I was just like, it almost made me upset because it was Brawl in Cell Block 99 with Vince Vaughn. God, what a great movie. Oh my God, what a great movie. And the whole time I'm watching that movie, I'm like, my dad would have loved this movie, man. It just made me so sad that he couldn't see it because he would have loved it. It was so right up his alley. But Dave Whitebread says Bram Stoker's Dracula, and that's a great film. And nobody said Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, by the way, which I actually like more than Bram Stoker's Dracula. I love both of those films. I think they're both really elegant retellings of classic stories that tried to stick to the books as close as they could, right? And I love Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. A lot of people complain about Robert De Niro in that he's not a great Frankenstein, but I think he did pretty good. I love the movie. And so I was the first person on the post here to throw out New Nightmare. And I got a lot of love for that from people for talking about New Nightmare. And I'm going to take a drink. Getting parched. Okay, Regina DeCorley, my beautiful wife, weighed in here. And she says Event Horizon, which in her mind is actually kind of equal to Jacob's Ladder. Both movies are extremely messed up and original, and they are nightmare fuel for sure. And I see what she's saying there because Event Horizon and Jacob's Ladder both have a kind of setting where it's real, but isn't real. It's set in reality, but is what's happening real? Yeah, so that's a great comparison, I think. Nathan Bartleball comes back. He says Tremors 2, but he's Tremors TOO, meaning also, not Tremors 2. But Yeah, that's a great one. We talked about Tremors a little bit already. Lawrence Adams says Silence of the Lambs. Willis Wheeler, who was on the earlier post and is now on the live feed, says Species. And we'll go back over here to the right. Day of the Dead. Two Fallon says, is Day of the Dead have elements of Walking Dead the series? Day of the Dead is from '85, I believe, and but yeah, I can see what you're saying. There it does have some, Land of the Dead, which came out I think 2004, also has a lot of things that I think got pushed on into The Walking Dead. George Christian says best vampire movie is The Lost Boys, though it came out in '87. Yep, yep. I don't. Nah, I can't say. To me, Lost Boys it didn't come out in the '90s, which is what we're talking about, and it's not the best vampire movie in my opinion. In my opinion, it's not even the best vampire movie from 1987. That one would go to Near Dark for me. I wouldn't argue with anybody about it, but I'm just saying that's my opinion. Um, Aiden says From Dusk Till Dawn is great. She also enjoyed the sequel by Scott Spiegel. And we are getting more comments. Gladwin says, tell me a little bit more about your Patreon. I have an audio novel you could review, voice acted in the present tense. Well, our Patreon page is just, you go to Patreon, you look up J versus Horror, and it'll give you all the information there. We also put a link, like all of our videos. If you go back and look through any of the recent videos, you'll see in the description we have a link to our Patreon page. It's just a place where people can donate to podcasts and, YouTube creators, stuff like that, small time horror stuff, people who aren't sponsored by any major sites yet. So it helps us offset our costs so we can keep going and keep getting better equipment. Eventually this needs to be not a headset. I want to have a mic eventually, a real mic. I just haven't, we don't do podcasts, so I'm not sure if I need a mixer and mic and all that stuff. I tried the podcast stuff before and it just wasn't for me. I kind of like the video thing better. I like to make videos. I like to lay imagery over the videos and show people trailers so they can kind of see the movies that we're talking about. So I don't know if I'll ever get into podcasting again. If I do, it'll have to be somebody. It won't be under the name J versus Horror. It'll have to be a thing where somebody lures me into it. I'll need a partner who is really good at podcasting and editing and things like that. If they can lure me back, I'll never say no that I won't go back to it. But just as far as editing, it's so frustrating and all that stuff. I don't like to deal with podcasting too much. Now, if I just get to talk and somebody else gets to edit and we could come up with a new idea for a show and a new name and all that stuff, then yeah, I'd be interested in going back to it. But not going to do it on my own because I hate editing. Video editing is hard enough, and believe it or not, I find it easier than audio editing. Nathan Bartleball says Dead Alive and The Cemetery Man. Those are some good picks. I think I skipped a couple people here. Dave Waugh, who does a podcast called The Great Fright North, talks about Canadian horror films. A great podcast. Dave has a great voice too. He's really got that voice for podcasting. I don't. I'm just kind of like a country guy who talks about horror movies. And Dave says, there's so many to choose from, so many great ones already suggested. Let me add a few greats that get forgotten. Night of the Living Dead, the remake. I love Night of the Living Dead, the remake with Tony Todd. Also Bill Moseley in that for just a little bit. And he says, Cemetery Man, Brain Dead / Dead Alive from Peter Jackson. So yeah, those are great films. And Matt R.J. Merrick says, Nightbreed. Jacob McKee says In the Mouth of Madness, Scream 1 and 2. I brought up Ravenous, and I said it that on that particular post, it was funny and surprising that nobody had mentioned it or The Stand yet from Stephen King. McCall Bates says, I know what you did last summer. I fucking adored it. I know people say it's a copy of Scream, but it really wasn't. The story was completely different in my opinion, just like Halloween inspired Friday the 13th and A Nightmare on Elm Street. Scream inspired I Know What You Did Last Summer and Urban Legend, and that's cool with me. Yes, we talked about that a little bit already, but a great point there made by Mikkel Bates. We will flip back over here to see what you guys are talking about. Okay, we don't have it. I'm still good over here with you guys. So, all right, Megan Meyer Pritchett. And Megan comments a lot on different stuff. I don't know if she's got a podcast or anything, but I know she comments a lot. Very knowledgeable horror fan. She's like, I think the Scream movies, they're all classic. Sean Neesoff says the first Scream. Marty Fleming. The 90s was a strange decade for horror. So many films that were weird and experimental. Clive Barker became mainstream. Aw, crap. Event Horizon 2. Cube, Deep Rising, and Dark City. There's arguments against them being classed as horror, but they all definitely are. It was such a strange decade, but some great horror films. I have to totally agree with all of that. Yeah. And of course, James Deadpool Phillips is one of our guys who likes to try to be funny instead of actually answering the question. He says Showgirls. Sean Neoff says Sleepwalkers. Nathan Dance says Nightbreed and the People Under the Stairs. J. John Orner says Brain Scan, and Tristan Olson weighs in with Candyman. So we're moving through these guys. We're moving through them. Elena Benz says Scream, Richard Perkins, Jacob's Ladder, hands down. And we just rewatched Jacob's Ladder, or I rewatched it. Regina had never seen Jacob's Ladder before. This was her first time seeing it. We watched the original, and then we watched the remake back to back because we're going to talk about them eventually. The thing is, like, we've tried to record that segment a couple times already, and it just doesn't come out the way I want it to because it's really hard to describe that movie without anything visual. Or without giving too much away about it, too, because you want people to watch the movie. You don't want them to just listen to you tell them the movie. So, yeah, I'm still working on that. We're working on that, how we're going to get that episode out. Whodunit 32 says Hideaway from 1995, another great film based on a Dean Koontz book. Even though Dean Koontz wanted nothing to do with that film and had his name taken off of it eventually, I like it a lot. Jeff Goldblum, Christine Latte, Jeremy Sisto, and Alicia Silverstone, I believe. Yeah, great film. I like it a lot. I mean, it's probably not as good as the book, but what is? And Aiden says, what's your thoughts on Tobe Hooper's spontaneous combustion? I don't have really any comments on that one. So what else do we got? Aaron Scott says The Ninth Gate. Alex Pearson from Gag Me with a Knife says Scream. Marty Fleming says he's going to shut his brain off and just say Event Horizon. Graham Nolan says Silence of the Lambs. Andrew Rooney says without looking at what was released and off the top of my head, I'll say Scream, and I know what you did last summer. Greg Bench, The First Power. Here's another great early 90s horror film. Frankenhooker, Night of the Living Dead remake. Misery, Warlock, Popcorn. I think somebody just named a bunch of movies off from the era, right? Yeah, but they're great. Nobody said Popcorn except for him. Nobody said Warlock except for him, which is a good one with Julian Sands. Buffy the Vampire Slayer. I thought maybe that is 90. I thought it was a little bit earlier than that. Innocent Blood. That's a good film with Robert Loggia. The Leprechaun series, Man Bites Dog, Fire in the Sky, Army of Darkness, Brain Scan, New Nightmare, and Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. So somebody did say Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. And he says just to name a few. Ha ha ha. Emily says Fallen is pretty good. Yes, that's great. She also says she wishes Final Destination came out in 1999, but it didn't. It came out in 2000. And she says she forgot her actual favorite movie of the 90s, which is Slumber Party Massacre 3. And she says that's tied with Jacob's Ladder, an actual amazing piece of cinema. And Slumber Party Massacre 3 just tugs at every piece of my teenage years. I understand that. Ursino Garcia Hernandez says Scream for the script, Blair Witch Project for the hype, and Dusk Till Dawn for watchability. Osman Ali says Exorcist, the uncut version. That's actually interesting, yeah, because they did put out the director's cut of The Exorcist around that. And then we have Ian Chalice, who says, I think Candyman is probably the best pure horror of the entire decade. Steve Madari says Army of Darkness, Jacob's Ladder, and The New Nightmare. And Emily says that Slumber Party Massacre 3 and Night of the Demons 2 are by far the most rewatchable for her, and they just make her feel good. Emily commented a lot. We still have 27 comments, guys, to go. So I'm going to flip back over here, and Aiden says, any fans of The Dark Half? I love The Dark Half. Timothy Hutton, directed by George Romero, based on the Stephen King book. I think that one's a little underrated. Amy Ramirez says Amityville 1992. I think that's the one that's called Amityville. It's about time, right? and Sleepy Hollow and Interview with the Vampire, all great films. Who Done It 32 says Dark Half 1993, I think, was Timothy Hutton that did those Nero Wolf TV movies along Mary Shaken. Uh, Joe Owensby says Scream, Night Breed, Night or Tales from the Dark Side, which is Tales from Dark Side the movie. I think that's the early 90s, a 90 or 91. Hasn't been mentioned yet. That's a great film. I like that one. And I think it's a great anthology film and really underrated. James Remar is one of my favorite people to talk to when I go to horror conventions because he just doesn't pull punches. He like tells it like it is. And I really enjoy his segment in that movie, the last one about the gargoyles. And Tales from the Crypt, Demon Knight, great Tales from the Crypt movie, guys. It just doesn't get much better than Jada Pinkett Smith and Billy Zane in that movie. Awesome casting there. Also Thomas Hayden Church and a few other people. With CCH Pounders in that too, I think. Francisco Bosch says The Silence of the Lambs. Barry Wilkinson says Cemetery Man, aka De La Morte de l'Amor. Yeah, that's what it's called. And it has Rupert Everett in it. It's a decent Italian horror film that's not a giallo, so that's very interesting, right? Amy Ramirez says The Faculty. Of course, everybody loves The Faculty. Josh Hartnett. What's his name? What's the guy's name? What's the guy's name? I can't think of it right now. He's so famous. Oh God, the guy who's a maniac. What's his name? Eli. It's not Eli. He was in The Good Son. You guys know who I'm talking about. It's just slipping my head right now because I'm talking about so many people at the same time. But anyway, and Amy says The Frighteners, Beware the Moors, Sleepwalkers from Surge. Some people are commenting just off the wall stuff. I mean, I don't understand why people are talking about American Werewolf in London. That's from like 1981. And who done it says Robert Patrick was also in The Faculty. So was Salma Hayek and Famke Janssen, I think is her name, right? So yeah, it was Elijah Wood. Elijah Wood. Thank you, Brain, for coming back. But yeah, John McLaughlin says From Dusk Till Dawn. Tony Moss Scream. Probably his favorite is Army of Darkness, though. Patrick O'Brien says Scream, Deep Rising, Army of Darkness, and The Faculty. David Ryan Prozinski says Jacob's Ladder or Silence of the Lambs. Amanda Hernandez says Scream for sure. Aaron Garcia says Night of the Living Dead remake or Candyman. Kayla Shenibel says Scream and Candyman. A lot of Candymans, a lot of Screams. Ryan Willick says Candyman and Scream, Blair Witch Project, Stir of Echoes, and The Last Broadcast, which I mentioned earlier in this broadcast. Sean Provost says his top three are Scream, Ringu from 1998, and The Blair Witch Project. So Ringu's one we hadn't seen yet. That's pretty good. Alicia Darby says Army of Darkness, Scream, Candyman, Blair Witch. Also needs to mention as that movie was awesome. So a lot of these are just re-mentions. I don't know if we need to go through all of them, other than everybody commented, and I want to be fair and put everybody's comments out there. Keith OMB says Scream, I Know What You Did Last Summer, Urban Legend, Candyman, Faculty, and D. Snyder's Strangeland. That's another one we hadn't had mentioned yet, so that's a good one. Brett Boyd says Scream. It in my opinion has the best slasher opening sequence. It was hip and fun and never took itself too seriously. Great cast, great soundtrack. Yes. And then we had somebody on here who I'm actually going to go ahead and remove from the group right now because they said I never saw it. It looked too corny for me. But you do you, bud. If we all like the same thing, we wouldn't have all these genres. That's ridiculous. That's you're in a horror group and you're gonna sit there and be like, I never saw a Scream. It looks stupid to me. That'll get you probably removed. I don't know. We'll talk about it later. I'll think about it later. I'll think about it. Maybe leave that person there. Maybe they need to see Scream. Maybe they'll change their mind. But I don't mind that you didn't see it. That's not the problem. But if you didn't see it, how are you gonna run it down? Oh, it was corny. It looked corny to me. Well, you didn't see it. It's been out for 25 years. What's holding you back? You know what I mean? I guess the fact that it looked corny. Well, don't comment then, right? I get aggravated with people like that. I don't like people who run other people's opinions down in my groups. We're talking about the J versus Horror group on Facebook. We have 26,000, almost 27,000 members there, guys. If you're not a member, go check it out. I guarantee you, if you post in there, you're going to get a reaction. Everybody gets huge reactions, especially if you post questions, if you ask questions and things like that. I just don't like it when people kind of, you know, you like this, so I'm going to shit on it. I hate that. I'm not even going to read that person's next comment because of that. Josh Clark says brain scan. George Rogers, who does a great podcast. If you like James Bond, you'll love George Rogers 007, Station 007 podcast. I always get that one mixed up. He said he's late to the party on this, but he's going to go with a wild pick in the Mouth of Madness, and we talked about that one a little bit earlier. Great film there with Sam Neill. Um, Todd Edgman says, I don't know if Fear is a horror, but I loved it. I don't know if he's talking about. I'm going to assume he's talking about the Fear with Mark Wahlberg, which is well, that's close enough. I mean, if you consider horror, we'll consider horror. That's the way I feel. But there's also a film called Fear with Ali Sheedy that's kind of a horror film about a serial killer that's pretty good. Kind of a precursor to Silence of the Lambs. Tony Goggles says Dead Alive. Peja Vujakov says 7. Kayla Schneebel says Final Destination, but you missed it by 1 year, Kayla. Darren Murray says Jacob's Ladder and Cube. Brandon Lee Bennett says, yeah, we're going to remove that guy too. I get, he says Pee Wee's Big Adventure. That's stupid. I mean, you had one chance to comment and you wasted it, so we don't need you in my group as far as I'm concerned. Not that I don't have a sense of humor. I do have a sense of humor sometimes, but when a lot of people are commenting and they're trying to make a good conversation, and somebody says showgirls or people, that's just a wasted comment, right? And so then Brandon comes back in here and tries to make another comment, which I'm not even going to mention because of that. I just don't like that stuff, guys. Just don't like it. I don't know what to say about it. Horror, I think horror takes enough shit as it is without, people throwing more on top of it. And Bud Carell says Silence of the Lambs. And Joshua Pavlik, our last comment on this particular post, says Silence of the Lambs 7 and Candyman. Woo! All right. So we'll go back up here and we'll start reading some of these comments off. Who Done It 32 says Clay Duvall was also, yes, it was Clay Duvall. He says Leah, but it's Clay. There's a C on that. Clay Duvall. And Serge says thumbs up. Amy says Village of the Dam. That's a fun film from John Carpenter. Nice remake. And I always love to see Christopher Reeves up walking around. Any movie where he was still, Christopher Reeves, I love that, But Gladwin says the film that scared me the most as a kid wasn't even a horror film. It was Pacific Heights with Michael Keaton. Really? Michael Keaton is just like the worst tenant in the world in Pacific Heights. He rents a room for Matthew Modine and Melanie Griffith, I believe. Or is it Meg Ryan? I can't remember. One of those two. And tears it apart. I mean, he just destroys the apartment, destroys their dream of owning this great big home. And then he starts to screw with them quite a bit too, personally, and causes her to have a miscarriage. I mean, it's a pretty rough film. So yeah, I get what you're saying. Michael Keaton just kind of has that look too, right? Like he's crazy. Who Done It says Dark City, 1998. Jeepers Creepers, talking about an amazing start to a film that falls flat on its face. Yeah, I think Creepers is like 2001, maybe 2002. Amy Ramirez says Christopher Walken in The Prophecy. Yeah, that was a great pick. Craig P says Clay Duvall. Yeah, we talked about that. I love John Carpenter's Vampire, says Aiden. I think it was his last great film, in my opinion. Yeah, probably. I don't know. I like The Ward with Amber Heard. I know a lot of people don't like Amber Heard, but I kind of like that movie. It came out, I think, 2010, 2011. Viggo Mortensen was also good in The Prophecy. Yes, he was very good in it. Patrick Babcock says In the Mouth of Madness is the quintessential. Who Done It says those guys are just trolling. Yeah, they're trolling. I mean, like that's why I don't like. I'm not gonna if you're trying to be funny at the expense of the fact that other people are making real comments and you're sitting there being an asshole. I'm not gonna read your comment. And also, it's my group and it's basically got my name on it. So there's 27,000 people in there. I'm gonna remove whoever I want to whenever I want to. And every time I remove someone, I'll just add 10 more people who are actual horror fans that I don't have to worry about that with. Amy says The Guardian. Craig says The Exorcist 3. Amy says Death by Temptation. And Who Done It says Mimic, 1997. Another great Guillermo del Toro film. Or wait, Guillermo del Toro, isn't it? Mimic 97. Yeah, I think so. It's when he falls on a nail and the end stuck right in my head. Oh, okay, yeah, I see what you're talking about. Yeah, with Pacific Heights. Aiden says the Ward was a cool flick, and Serge said, "Would Serial Mom count?" It had so a lot of people talk about Serial Mom all the time. So yeah, I mean, if it's horror, it's horror. I don't, that doesn't bother me, guys. If it's horror, I don't care that you mentioned it. What bothers me is when people go out of the way to be a jackass on a post where a lot of people are fans and are trying to be serious. And it shouldn't bother me, but it does. I just think that the horror genre already takes enough crap without its own fans giving it to it. So let's go from here to Twitter, and we're going to read some of our famous friends what they left behind. Now, some of the other people who left stuff long. Alan Iced Tea at Alan Michaels Show says Wishmaster 2, Evil Never Dies. I don't know about that one, buddy. I don't even know if that's did that one make the 90s? I know the original Wishmaster did. And Joe Russo. Joe is the producer of Nightmare Cinema, the movie, the anthology that came out a couple years ago. Great anthology. He's also a good friend of Mick Garris. He does his podcast with him, the director of The Stand. And he says, "Scream!" And he puts an exclamation point on it, like he is actually screaming it. Johnny Crash says, "In the Mouth of Madness." And Darcy weighs in with Scream. Scream is her favorite. I'll try to see who said what here. Yeah, Michael Roche says Scream. He says Darcy and he are both massive Scream fans. Casey Nash says Ravenous, Dust Till Dawn, The Silence of the Lambs, Audition, Tremors, and John Carpenter's Vampires, just to name a few. And so those are some of the more known comments we had on the Twitter feed. I'm going to go back here because there was one more thing I wanted to check before we finished up here. I did a live telling people to get on and make sure that they got their stuff in. And I want to see if I can find the comments on that because there was quite a few. I believe there were quite a few. Facebook's always got to be complicated. They change Facebook daily, right? Like they change Cube. Scott Workman says Cube, Brain Scan, Chronos, Bad Moon, Hardware. That's a good one. That's one that nobody else mentioned. Cemetery Man and Man Bites Dog. He also says Nightbreed, Candyman, and Lord of Illusions, which is another one that nobody mentioned from Clive Barker, a great Clive Barker film with Scott Bakula in it. And Nathan Bartleball talks more about Audition. He says because it's so singular and subversive, it aggressively attacks a whole cultural mindset. And truthfully, it's one of the few horror movies to legitimately scare and disturb me for days after seeing it. I feel you there, man. I was dating a lot at the end of the late 90s. And so Audition, yes, that's a terrifying movie. Tremors, because it's ultimate melding of 80s goofball adventure and 50s monster movies, setting up a new template for the 90s. And Begotten, because Begotten is batshit crazy. I agree with all that. And Leah comments on it. I vote for Outer Space. No way these are local boys. I think that's a line from Tremors, right? Leah says Jacob's Ladder, Candyman, Silence of the Lambs, the Blair Witch Project, and says Jacob's Ladder because I love Tim Robbins and I love the imagery. Candyman because of how relevant it is for race issues and because of Tony Todd's performance. Silence because of everything, and Anthony Hopkins is absolutely terrifying. Blair Witch because it feels so authentic and it can be interpreted many ways, and the marketing was genius. She's right on all levels there. And Emily talks about Night of the Demons, or she says Demons 2. I don't know what she's saying there. She says, I want Night do the Demons 2. I think she meant I want to do Night of the Demons 2. Yeah, she's talked about that one already. Sleepaway Camp 3, Jacob's Ladder should be on this list. It's a cinematic masterpiece. Isaac Smalls says Wishmaster. Alex Pearson says 1000% Scream. And I may sound like a broken record, but okay, it definitely saved and reinvented the slasher genre. Adim Carvalho I think I'm saying his name right. It says Necromantic. Shauna Reeves says, I love Scream, and I think it ties with I Know What You Did Last Summer for rewatchability and just enjoying the movie. Colin Power says, Event Horizon, In the Mouth of Madness, Silence of the Lambs. Kayla Lockridge says, Subspecies movies, Halloween 6 and the Candyman. That's the first shout out for Halloween 6. Good job there. Kayla, I love Halloween 6, even though everybody thinks it's terrible. Carrie Melville says, Audition Ringu. Dust Till Dawn, Candyman, Stir of Echoes. And Mark Flemich says, Urban Legend. Seth Cora says, probably the entire Carnosaur series. Even though they are in no way amazing movies, they are tons of fun. Hell, the second one was a carbon copy of Aliens. Then again, how can you ever go wrong with Roger Corman? You just can't. Rick Bonifacio says, Candyman is a great one. The underrated Frighteners too. Matt Sharp says, In the Mouth of Madness. Tim Cockrell says, Dead Alive. Chris Horn says, Pumpkinhead 2, Blood Wings. And Chris Horn also says, Urban Legend, we made it, guys. We got through every comment everywhere, or at least as many as I possibly could at this moment in time without refreshing and going through different stuff. We're going to read the last ones over here on the right. And it's been fun, guys. I've had a lot of fun with this tonight. And you guys have been great, especially people here on the live just coming up with more and more stuff that nobody talked about. Really appreciate you guys. So where are we at? Amy says Children of the Night, 1991. Who Done 32 says the Showgirls line is actually from Scream 2 when they ask, what's your favorite scary movie? And Randy says Showgirls. Absolutely frightening. Yeah, but yeah. He says, so the troll couldn't even be original. Thank you. I mean, I might let that go because of that, because it is a line from Scream and Scream 2, and I'm glad you brought that up. But yeah, I don't know. I just don't like that, man. I wish like people would be serious. But he did leave another comment after that I skipped past. So maybe I'll let that one go. I won't be such a jerk about that. I just don't put up with stuff and with crap in my group. There's no racism. There's no bullshit. Nobody gets to talk bad to each other. I moderate everything that goes down. I have a crack team of moderators and admins, and we remove people left and right. I mean, if people talk bad to each other, if they put each other down for their opinions, there's a lot of things that you get removed for, and we don't care because we have several thousand people standing in line behind those people, and we just let them in. And Patrick Babcock says, Nightbreed and Whodunit ends us up with Popcorn 1991. So, yes, we did it. We made it through it. Great job, guys. I really appreciate everybody who commented, both in the group, on the page, commented on the live, commented on Twitter, and the people who came and showed up here tonight to comment. You guys did an excellent job here tonight on the live. I really appreciate you really giving it to us tonight because yeah, you guys kept coming through with movies that nobody else had mentioned, and that's what it's about. We like to have fun. So check us out on Patreon, guys. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will talk to you, as always, the next time we've got something we're talking about. Bye.